Gripey. Great to be with you here on a Monday morning. We are rolling as we get through the dog days of sports radio, but there's no such thing. A big misnomer. Sports are happening, folks. Got baseball heating up. The Giants lose 2 or 3 to the Cubs. We'll talk to Melissa Lockhard in a second here from The Athletic as she covers the Giants farm system. And, of course, there's a lot of things happening with the youngsters with the Giants, so we'll get her thoughts on that. We got a lot going on with the Golden State Warriors. We'll get right back into Anthony Slater's article about Jordan Poole's future. Kirk Lacob, that is, and Mike Dunleavy Jr. right now are running this show. The Warriors appear to be in no rush to name a GM, and it feels like Mike Dunleavy Jr. and Kirk Lacob will lead the draft and free agency, and there's some big decisions to make for the Golden State Warriors. Not much happening on the football front, but all around sports. Well, I want to get into golf in a little bit here, the live golf and the PJ, some of the stuff I saw for the weekend. Yeah, NASCAR up at Sonoma's Point, formerly Sears Point, I guess, but Sonoma Raceway up there. A lot of things happening. Mayweather's exhibition ends in a brawl. Go figure. He's just stealing money from people at this point. But let's go to Melissa Lockhard, who joined us last year, gave us so much good intel. We've been begging to have her back. She's a popular lady on the circuit. Melissa, good morning. Welcome back to the Roast with Joe Shasky, the Butcher, and Bonte Hill. How you doing this Monday?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We want to talk farm system here with you, but some of the youngsters we're starting to see for the Giants starting to pay dividends. Case Schmitt, Patrick Bailey playing really well behind the backstop here. Luis Matos tearing it up here. So the Giants, last time I talked to you, it felt like it was more about 2024, getting the youngsters ready to go for 2024. But do you believe now the Giants are ahead of schedule with some of their youngsters here, Melissa, as we move forward in 2023?
Yeah, it's always hard to peg a schedule because, as you've, I think, experienced over the last couple of years, prospect development is definitely not linear. You've got your ups and your downs. And I think if 2021, we would look at it and say, oh, wow, 2023 would have been exactly when we expected these guys to arrive. And then last year there was a pretty big speed bump for a lot of them. And that expectation kind of pulled back. But they've made up for that this year. So, I think, not everyone's going to arrive at the same time, and people are going to be on different timelines, but I would expect they're going to continue to get more contributions from young players as the season goes on.
Before we get to who's going to come up and whatever, what do you think, flipped everything? Was it just a couple of guys, Bailey and Case Schmitt, kind of getting hot at the right time and then making an imprint on the organization at a big league level? What flipped for the organization? Because it feels so different today than it did until, if we go back 1 year ago.
Yeah, I think one of the things I wrote when I was doing my preview this year was that one of the good things about a bad season last year was that all those guys are still there. I think if they had good seasons last year, some of them would have been traded at the deadline, and maybe you'd be seeing them have breakouts for other teams. The talent was always there, and I think sometimes things just happen. And I know it's sort of a weird, frustrating thing to deal with, but each guy had sort of an individual story. You can look at Luis Matos. He got off to a slow start in a tough hitting environment in Eugene. Then he got hurt. Then he was trying to make up for lost time, and I think maybe over swinging a little bit. And it just sort of snowballed on him. And I think there were a couple of guys that sort of happened to. And ultimately, you kind of have to look at it as these things kind of come when they come. And it does seem weird that they all happened at the same time, but I don't know that there was any magic formula that did it. There were talented kids, and it's a good system with really good people in charge. And I think ultimately the good stuff was going to rise to the top, and it has this season.
Melissa Lockhard here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 The Game does a great job chronicling the farm system for both the A's and the Giants for The Athletic. Follow her on Twitter at Melissa Lockhard. She does it well. Been doing it for over 20 years in the world of baseball. So you brought up Matos here, who's hit 4 home runs in the last 5 games. He's tearing the ball up. Giants fans are salivating over his arrival to the big league club. So what is the latest surrounding Luis Matos? How much longer can the Giants keep him up there in Sacramento?
Yeah, I think his time is coming soon, which is super exciting. I think a lot like Case Schmitt, the good thing about Luis Matos is that the glove will carry him even if the bat starts out slow, so it's not like a situation where you're bringing up a guy whose bat has to be hot right away for him to make an impact on the big league team. And you started seeing that even when the Giants are playing well at the big league level right now, center field has not defensively been an area of strength for them. So, even if he came up and it took him a little while to get going as a hitter, I think the impact you could see with him as a defender right away would be pretty significant. And I think that's what you've seen with Schmitt as well. But I think the fact that he is as hot as he is right now, and he's kind of a feel hitter, he's got incredible bat-to-ball skills. And when he's feeling it, I think that's probably a pretty good time to bring him up. So, I can't guess exactly when they're going to do it, but you sort of read the tea leaves a little bit with the Kapler's post-game comments and all that sort of stuff. You sort of get a sense that maybe it's coming pretty soon.
We've heard so much about Luciano, for example. Did Matos leapfrog him, or is he just having an outlier kind of a run right now? Like, what's going on? Or is it his positional depth? Why is he ascending so much?
Yeah, I think part of it is that, he was healthy at the start of this season, and Luciano was not. And I think that is 90% of what happens in baseball is like how healthy you can be. So, that sort of made a difference. Obviously, there was a bigger opening in center field to move up than there is in shortstop right now for the Giants. I think that's ultimately an easier spot for somebody to come up and be on the big league roster right away. Marco, he struggled with a back injury, and I think back injuries can be, really difficult, not just offensively, but defensively and getting your timing. And he's off to a slow start with Richmond, but this past week he hit a couple of home runs, and I think you'll start to see him get in that groove. And like with Matos, I think he's the kind of player that when he starts to feel it, it's going to come together pretty quickly. Again, the talent is definitely still there. He just needs the health and the rhythm back, I think.
So will we see him maybe as a September call-up? I know he hasn't gotten to AAA yet, Marco Luciano, that is, but it feels like his bat is heating up. Is there any slim chance that we'll see him at all this season in a Giants uniform?
I think so. He's on the 40-man roster, and I think with the Giants that means more than maybe some other organizations because they do value those roster spots so highly. He wasn't added to the 40-man roster because they for sure knew they were going to need him this year, but at the same time, they weren't going to add him if they didn't think he could possibly help. So, absolutely, I think if he's hitting well in August, if he's hitting well, even in July, and they need somebody for a couple of days, I think you've seen that, they're not afraid to bring people up when they need them for the big leagues at that time. So, just because he's off to a bit of a slow start doesn't mean that he wouldn't have a chance to play with the big leagues this year.
You're so tapped in on this, and I love your perspective because you just know more than anybody out there. So I want to rat-a-tat-tat these three pitchers because it feels like to me the Giants need starting pitching. And if one of these guys or any of these guys could make an impact, whether this year or next year, it would really help them. Kyle Harrison, where's he at? Where do you think he fits into the equation?
Yeah, he's getting close too. He again, a guy who it took him a couple of starts in AAA to really find the strike zone and what that kind of, especially that automatic ball strike system was doing to stuff that sort of played at the corners of the zone with him. But now that he has a real feel for it, he's been throwing more strikes more consistently, and you've been seeing the results. They've been very careful with all their starting pitchers in terms of the number of pitches they're letting them throw. And I think I saw a tweet the other day that they are averaging the least number of pitches per start of any organization in baseball, and that's by design. But he's starting to tick up in terms of the number of pitches and innings he's throwing per start. And I think that when you start to see him get to 5 innings, he pitched into the 5th inning in his last start, which was the first time this year. And when you start to see him get full 5 innings is when you would start to maybe put on the calendar that he's getting there. But the stuff looks great. He's throwing more strikes. He's a very talented pitcher. He's shown the ability to pitch in front of, friends and family, which in San Jose and Sacramento, they're all nearby because he went to De La Salle. And that's a lot of pressure for a kid who's, as young as he is. So I think that bodes well for when he's going to do that in San Francisco as well.
Yeah, and it feels like they have another lefty who's rising. Carson Wisenhunt, he missed his final year at East Carolina because of the steroid suspension or performance enhancement suspension, and they take him late in the second round. And it feels like when you get compared to Bumgarner and you're flying through the minors, I don't know, I'm really intrigued with this guy.
Yeah, he's fun, too, because he's kind of a throwback in the sense that, his best stuff isn't the fastball. He's got a solid fastball, but it's not like the overpowering 100-mile-per-hour sort of light up the radar gun sort of thing. It's his secondary pitches that are really outstanding, his breaking ball and his curveball and, his changeup. And he throws a lot of strikes. He gets a lot of swings and misses. He's aggressive. And, he's already in Double-A. He did miss that time at East Carolina, but in some ways that might not be the worst thing in terms of his health, because sometimes those guys as juniors get overused a little bit in college. So he came in with a pretty fresh arm this year. He does have the seasoning that comes from being a 4-year college pitcher. So, Yeah, I mean, there's an outside chance that he could make an impact at the end of this year, just given how quickly he's moved up. But certainly next year, I think you're going to hear a lot about him.
He sounds like he's legit. I've been hearing a lot about this Wizenhunt kid. So, Case Schmitt for a second. There were some rumors that they may have to send him back down to Sacramento, and I'm kind of against that, especially with Brandon Crawford, which could be his farewell tour. It really could be. But I want Case Schmitt to kind of be around Brandon Crawford throughout the season to soak up some of that knowledge that Brandon Crawford has, the way he takes infield. I mean, this guy's a Gold Glove winner, and who better to be around while you're coming up in the game than to learn from a Brandon Crawford? What do you think happens if Case Schmitt does go back to AAA? Is that a detriment to him? Does that mess with him mentally? Because we've seen a guy like Joey Bart go back and forth from Sacramento to the Giants, and he's never able to gain traction here. Case Schmitt, I think he just needs to stick with the big league club, and hopefully he doesn't go down to Sacramento. What's your thoughts on that, Melissa?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if you've ever spoken with A's assistant GM, Billy Owens, but he's one of the smartest guys in baseball, and one of the things he always talks about is one of the toughest mental grinds is the going back and forth and the staying in the big leagues once you get there. It's hard to get there, but it's really, really hard to stay. And that's the biggest thing for players to be able to figure out how to do is to make those adjustments and stay. And certainly he would not be the first really good player to get up here, do well, struggle a little bit, have to go back down, reset, and then come back up again and have a very fine career. I don't think it would be devastating. I think it's certainly something that has happened before. I think there are players who could help him with that. They've got a great staff in Sacramento that's very used to helping players if that happened, and I'm not saying that it would, but if it did. And I think he's a really mentally tough kid. I mean, I think that's the other thing, too, is you kind of look at the players and you look at what you think is going to help them ultimately. And he's a guy that has always seemed to have a lot of confidence. He knows what he wants to do and where he wants to be. And I don't think it would devastate him. The Joey Bart situation, I think, was a lot more difficult because he was actually trying to have to replace a legend.
Right.
He had to come up in a weird year where there was the whole pandemic and the strange roster, and I just think everything has been working against him, unfortunately, and maybe a fresh start is really what he needs. But I don't know that would be reflective of how it would happen for any of the other players in the organization.
Well, Melissa Lockhard, if you don't follow her. She's tapped in. She knows what's going on with the Giants farm system. She's been all over it, and it feels like some of these youngsters we're going to be able to see sooner rather than later. Melissa always tapped in with a lot of information, good information there. Senior editor, staff writer at The Athletic. Melissa, we'll do it again soon when we start to see some of these guys come up even more like a Harrison, like a Matos, and like a Luciano. Thanks for the time this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Anytime, Melissa Lockhart here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 The Game. And it is very encouraging to see Farhan's plans start to come to fruition. Now we're starting to see what everybody was talking about with this farm system. And in patience, it feels like it's starting to pay off here for a lot of Giants fans.